They say the Second World War involved over 100 million people from more than 30 countries. It was the largest conflict in human history. A storm of numbers, logistics, and strategies. But when you look closer, past the grand maps and sweeping arrows of armies, you find stories. Stories so strange they make you question everything. Moments of pure, dumb luck. Twists of fate that defy all explanation. Was it all just chaos, a roll of the dice on a global scale? Or was there something else at work? A hidden pattern, a thread of destiny weaving through the noise and fury. We look at these events and call them coincidences, but what if they were something more? What if the universe, for a brief moment, decided to write a story with a punchline, a miracle, or a chilling piece of irony? These are not tales of grand strategy. They are the small, impossible moments that happen to ordinary people caught in an extraordinary time. Moments that suggest maybe, just maybe, it wasn't all random. Number 21. What if your uncle was the enemy's leader? Imagine it is 1944. You are a young man in the United States Navy. You are serving your country in the middle of the greatest war in history. You get wounded in combat. You receive the Purple Heart, a classic story of American service, but there is a twist. Your last name is Hitler, and your uncle is the Führer of the German Reich. This sounds like a fictional movie plot, but it was the real life of William Patrick Hitler. He was born in Liverpool, England in 1911. His father was Alois Hitler Jr., the older half-brother of the German leader. William, or Willie as he was called, had a complicated relationship with his powerful uncle. In the 1930s, he traveled to Germany to try and use his family connection for a better job. The connection was a strange one. His uncle reportedly called him my loathsome nephew. Their relationship soured, and Willie left Germany. He eventually moved to the United States with his Irish mother, Bridget, in 1939. When the war broke out, Willie found himself in an impossible position. He was in America, a country that would soon be at war with his uncle's regime. He wanted to prove his loyalty. He wanted to fight. But his last name was a massive red flag. He tried to enlist in the U.S. Army, but he was rejected. Who would trust a man with that name? So he did something incredibly bold. In 1942, William Patrick Hitler wrote a letter directly to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. In it, he laid out his situation and pleaded to be allowed to join the American Armed Forces. The letter was passed to the FBI for investigation. After a thorough background check, the authorities cleared him. In 1944, William Patrick Hitler was sworn into the United States Navy. He served as a pharmacist's mate. He saw combat in the Pacific Theater and was wounded, earning him the Purple Heart. The story was so bizarre that it was widely reported in American newspapers at the time, with headlines proclaiming Hitler against Hitler. After the war, he was honorably discharged. He changed his last name to Stuart Houston and melted into the quiet life of Long Island, New York. He raised a family and never spoke much about his strange, complicated past. He ran a successful small business that analyzed blood samples for hospitals. He wanted to be anonymous, he wanted to be normal, but his story remains one of the war's greatest personal ironies. A man fighting a war, in a way, against his own family. What was going through the minds of the naval officers who had to approve his enlistment? If he had been captured by German forces, would his family name have saved him or condemned him? And how did one family produce both the man who led the Third Reich and a man who bled for the Allied cause? Number 20. How do you survive a fall from 3 miles up? Think about falling. It is a primal fear. Now, imagine falling from 18,000 feet. That is over 3 miles. Straight down. The wind is screaming past you at 120 miles per hour. The ground is rushing up to meet you. You do not have a parachute. This is not a survivable event. It is a death sentence, except for one man. His name was Nicholas Alcamade. He was a 21-year-old sergeant in the Royal Air Force. He was a tail gunner on an Avro Lancaster bomber, one of the workhorses of the British air campaign. On the night of March 24th, 1944, his plane was returning from a bombing run over Berlin. It was his 14th mission. Over Germany, his bomber was attacked by a German night fighter. The plane caught fire. It began to spiral out of control. The captain gave the order to bail out. Alcamade grabbed his parachute, but when he looked at it, he saw it was engulfed in flames, completely useless. He was now faced with a terrible choice. He could stay in the burning, falling plane and be incinerated. Or he could jump into the freezing night air and fall to his death. He chose the jump. He preferred a quick, clean end to being burned alive. So he threw himself out of the plane's exit door and into the abyss. He said later that as he fell, he was strangely calm. He lost consciousness. He did not remember the impact. He woke up sometime later. He was lying on the ground. He saw the stars above him. He felt snow on his face. He checked his body. He was in pain, but he could move his arms and legs. He had a sprained leg, some cuts and bruises, and a slight concussion, but he was alive. How was this possible? He had fallen into a forest of pine trees. The soft, flexible branches had slowed his descent. After crashing through the trees, he landed in a deep, 18-inch drift of soft snow. The combination of the trees and the snow had cushioned his fall perfectly, saving his life. He was found by German civilians and eventually handed over to the authorities. At first, they did not believe his story. They assumed he must be a spy who had been dropped without a chute. They threatened him, demanding the truth. But when they investigated the crash site of his Lancaster bomber, they found something that changed their minds. They found the wreckage of the plane, and inside they found the charred remains of Alcimade's useless parachute. His story was true. The German authorities were so impressed they gave him a certificate testifying to the fact, in case his own commanders did not believe him. He became a minor celebrity in the prisoner of war camp. Nicholas Alcimade's fall is considered one of the most incredible survival stories of the entire war. He lived a long life, passing away in 1987. But what are the exact odds of this happening? Has anyone ever calculated the precise physics of his fall and the absorption of the impact by the trees and snow? How many thousands of other airmen jumped or fell from their planes, only to meet the fate Alcimade so miraculously avoided? Was it purely a matter of luck, or was there something more to a man surviving the unsurvivable? Number 19, can a single word change the course of a battle? Sometimes the smallest thing can have the biggest impact. A single word, a misplaced comma. In the desperate chaos of war, communication is everything. And a small error can lead to a huge, unbelievable outcome. This is the story of a battle for a bridge. A bridge that should have been destroyed but was saved by a quirk of language. The Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen in Germany. It was March 1945. The Allied armies were pushing into the heart of the German Reich. The Rhine River was the last major natural barrier. All the bridges across it were being systematically blown up by the retreating German forces to slow the Allied advance. The plan was to destroy every single one. The Ludendorff Bridge was wired with explosives, ready to be detonated. On March 7, 1945, the U.S. 9th Armored Division arrived at the town of Remagen. To their astonishment, the bridge was still standing. A small German force was defending it, with orders to blow it up at the last possible second to allow their own stragglers to cross. The American soldiers, led by Lieutenant Karl Timmerman, did not hesitate. They charged the bridge under heavy fire. The German officer in charge, Captain Wilhelm Broch, gave the order to detonate the charges. A soldier turned the key, but only a portion of the explosives went off. A huge plume of smoke and debris shot up, but the main structure of the bridge remained intact. The American soldiers kept coming. The Germans had a secondary backup fuse system. They lit it. It was supposed to burn for several minutes and then set off the main charges. But it failed too. The Americans swarmed across, cutting the remaining wires and securing the bridge. It was a massive strategic victory. It allowed the Allies to pour troops and tanks across the Rhine, speeding up the end of the war in Europe. The capture of the bridge was hailed as the miracle of Remagen. But why did the explosives fail? Years later, after the war, research pointed to a bizarre reason. The German High Command had ordered the use of a new type of explosive, a military or industrial grade dynamite. In German, the word for this was Donnerit. It was a less sensitive, more stable explosive designed for demolition, not for use in combat shells. The soldiers who wired the bridge, however, were used to working with standard military-grade TNT. They followed the instructions they knew for TNT, not for the less powerful Donnerit. They used standard military blasting caps, which were not powerful enough to reliably detonate the more stable industrial explosive. The main charge simply failed to go off. A single word, the name of a different type of powder, led to a failure that changed the course of the war on the Western Front. What if the correct instruction manual had been delivered with the explosives? How many more lives would have been lost if the Allies had been forced to make a difficult river crossing under fire? Is it possible that the entire outcome was balanced on the subtle chemical difference between two types of powder and the misunderstanding it caused. Number 18, what happens when you fight a ghost? War is about deception, making the enemy think you are where you are not, making them believe you are strong when you are weak. But one Allied unit took this idea to an extreme, unbelievable level. They were not soldiers in the traditional sense. They were artists, designers, sound engineers, and actors. Their job was to create an illusion. They were the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, better known as the Ghost Army. This top-secret unit, consisting of about 1,100 men, was created in 1944. Their mission was simple: impersonate other, much larger U.S. Army units to deceive the enemy. They used a strange and innovative arsenal. Instead of real tanks, they had inflatable rubber tanks that looked real from the air. Instead of real artillery, they had powerful speakers that could blast the sounds of an army on the move for miles. They created fake radio traffic using skilled operators who could mimic the unique sending style of other units' radiomen. They even had actors who would dress up as generals, drive into French towns, and talk loudly in cafes about fake plans, hoping local spies would overhear them. Their work was performance art on a battlefield. They could make it seem like an entire armored division of 15,000 men was massing in one location, when in reality it was just a few hundred men with rubber props and big speakers. This would draw enemy forces to the wrong place, leaving the real Allied units to attack a weakened front elsewhere. They carried out more than 20 major deceptions, from the fields of Normandy to the banks of the Rhine River. One of their most famous operations was Operation Viersen. In March 1945, the U.S. Ninth Army was preparing to cross the Rhine. The Ghost Army was tasked with creating a massive diversion. They set up their inflatable tanks and dummy artillery miles south of the real crossing point. They broadcast the sounds of bridge construction and troop movements all night long. The deception was so convincing that they drew an entire German division away from the real attack site. When the Ninth Army actually crossed the Rhine, they met with much lighter resistance than expected. The operation was a stunning success. The existence of the Ghost Army was kept classified for more than 40 years after the war. Their story was not declassified until 1996. Many of the men who served in the unit went on to have successful careers in the arts, including fashion designer Bill Blass and artist Ellsworth Kelly. They had used their creativity not to destroy but to deceive, saving countless lives in the process. But how many German intelligence reports from the final year of the war are filled with detailed accounts of phantom armies that never existed? Could a similar tactic, using digital instead of physical illusions, be used in modern warfare? And what does it say about the nature of war that one of the most effective weapons was not a bomb, but an idea, an illusion, a ghost? Number 17, could a crossword puzzle reveal the biggest secret of the war? In the spring of 1944, Allied planners were working on the biggest secret of the war, Operation Overlord, the D-Day landings in Normandy. Secrecy was absolute. The fate of the entire war depended on surprising the German forces. Any leak could lead to disaster. Then, something strange started happening in the pages of a British newspaper, the Daily Telegraph. Leonard Dahl was a school headmaster and the creator of the Telegraph's daily crossword puzzle. He was known for making his puzzles challenging and clever. In the month leading up to the D-Day invasion on June 6th, a series of highly sensitive code words related to the operation began appearing as answers in his puzzles. On May 2nd, the answer to 17 across was Utah. This was the code name for one of the two American landing beaches. On May 22nd, the answer to 3 down was Omaha, the code name for the other American beach. The coincidences kept coming. Overlord, the name of the entire operation, appeared. Mulberry, the code name for the artificial harbors that would be floated across the channel, showed up as an answer. And then on June 1st, just 5 days before the invasion, the answer to 11 across was Neptune, the code name for the naval phase of the invasion. This was not just 1 or 2 words, it was a whole cluster of the most secret code names of the entire war. MI5, the British counterintelligence agency, was panicked. They thought they had a massive security leak. They descended on Leonard Dawes' school. They interrogated him intensely. Was he a spy? Was someone feeding him these words? Daw was terrified. He insisted he had no idea what they were talking about. He explained that he created his puzzles months in advance. He said he often asked his students at the school to help him fill the grids with words. He claimed it was all just a massive, unbelievable coincidence. MI5 investigated his story. They spoke to the students. It turned out the boys would hang around the American and Canadian soldiers who were camped nearby, preparing for the invasion. They would listen to the soldiers' conversations. The soldiers, being young and far from home, would sometimes talk carelessly. They would use words they had heard from their officers, words like Omaha or Mulberry, without knowing their true significance. The boys would pick up these strange-sounding words and suggest them to their teacher for his puzzles. Daw, having no military background, simply saw them as good, unusual words to use. MI5 eventually concluded that Daw was telling the truth. It was, against all odds, a complete coincidence. The security of the biggest invasion in history was almost compromised by a school teacher and his curious students. But what if one of the students had understood the importance of what they were hearing? Could a child's loose talk have been the source of an intelligence leak that changed world history? And what are the statistical odds of that many top-secret code words appearing in a single newspaper's puzzles in the weeks before the operation they described? And number 16, can you be sentenced to death and saved by your own twin? The camps run by the German regime were places of unimaginable horror. They were designed to strip people of their humanity before taking their lives. Survival was often a matter of pure chance, a random decision by a guard, or a fluke of timing. For one man, survival came in the form of the most intimate and unbelievable coincidence of all, an identical twin. Josef Steiner and his twin brother Willy were circus performers from Germany. They were part of the Romani community, a group systematically targeted for persecution by the ruling party. In 1943, Josef was arrested and sent to a concentration camp. There, he was subjected to the horrific medical experiments conducted by the infamous SS doctor Josef Mengele, who had a particular fascination with twins. Josef managed to survive the experiments. Later in the war, Josef was transferred to a different camp. He was accused of trying to organize a resistance movement within the camp. For this, he was sentenced to death by hanging. The execution was scheduled to be carried out in front of all the other prisoners as a warning. On the day of the execution, Josef was marched to the gallows. He stood there, waiting for the end. Suddenly, there was a commotion. An SS officer stormed in, shouting. The execution was stopped. The officer claimed there had been a mistake. He said that the man who was supposed to be executed was not Josef, but another prisoner, a man named Willy. In a twist of fate that seems impossible, Josef's identical twin brother, Willy, had been arrested and sent to the very same camp just a few days earlier. The camp records were confused. An officer had mixed up the identities of the identical twins. The man who was supposed to die was Willy, not Josef. In the chaos, the SS officers, likely not wanting to admit their mistake, simply took Willy to the gallows instead. Josef was sent back to the barracks, a spectator at his own brother's execution. Willy was hanged. Josef survived. He was liberated from the camp in 1945. He lived until 2005, always carrying the memory of the day his face saved his life and condemned his brother. This story, documented in the book A Factual Report on the Sinti and Roma by the Documentation and Cultural Center of German Sinti and Roma, is a chilling example of the bureaucratic, arbitrary cruelty of the camp system. A life or death decision was made based on a clerical error. The fact that the error involved identical twins in the same camp, one of whom was scheduled for execution, pushes the boundary of coincidence into the realm of the surreal. What were the thoughts going through Joseph's mind as he watched a man with his own face being led to his death? Did the SS officers ever officially acknowledge their mistake, or did they simply alter the records to cover it up? And how does a person live with the knowledge that their own existence is the direct result of their twin's death? Number 15, how can a man's life be saved by his enemy? War creates clear lines, us versus them, friend versus enemy. But sometimes, in the middle of the most brutal combat, a moment of shared humanity can break through. In a moment so unexpected it feels like a coincidence, a glitch in the machinery of war. The story of Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown is one such moment. On December 20th, 1943, Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown was the pilot of an American B-17 bomber named the Old Pub. His mission was to bomb an aircraft factory in Bremen, Germany. During the bomb run, his plane was heavily damaged by anti-aircraft fire and German fighter planes. One engine was out, another was damaged. The plane's oxygen, hydraulic, and electrical systems were failing. The tail gunner was killed, and many of the crew were wounded. Brown himself was injured. The bomber was a wreck, barely able to stay in the air. As Brown struggled to fly his crippled plane back toward England, a German Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighter pulled up alongside him. The pilot was Franz Stigler, a German ace with 27 victories. It was his job to shoot down enemy bombers. For him, shooting down this B-17 would have been easy. It was a sitting duck. It would have also earned him the Knight's Cross, Germany's highest military honor. But as Steigler got closer, he could see the extent of the damage. He could see the dead-tail gunner. He could see the wounded crew members huddled inside the fuselage. He could see the fear in Charlie Brown's eyes. Stigler was a veteran of the air war in North Africa. He had a personal code of honor. He believed you did not shoot a man who was in a parachute. To him, this B-17 was essentially a parachute. It was defenseless, so Franz Stigler did something unbelievable. Instead of shooting, he flew his fighter alongside the American bomber. He made eye contact with Charlie Brown. He gestured with his hands, trying to tell him to land his plane in Germany or to fly to neutral Sweden. As Brown did not understand, he just kept flying toward England. Stigler was worried, the bomber was so damaged, it was a miracle it was still flying. He decided to escort it. He flew in formation with the B-17, shielding it from being seen by German anti-aircraft gunners on the ground. He flew with the American plane until they were over the North Sea, out of German airspace. Then, Stigler gave Brown a salute, peeled his fighter away, and returned to his base. Charlie Brown managed to fly his bomber back to England and land it safely. He told his commanding officers what had happened. They ordered him to keep it quiet. They did not want to create positive stories about enemy pilots. Franz Stigler never spoke of the incident either. He knew he would have been court-martialed and likely executed if his superiors found out he had spared an enemy plane. For over 40 years, both men kept their secret. Charlie Brown, now a civilian, spent years searching for the German pilot who had saved him. In 1990, he finally found Franz Stigler living in Canada. The two men met. They became close friends, like brothers, until their deaths in 2008. Their story is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, a shared sense of honor can create an impossible coincidence. A story detailed in the book A Higher Call by Adam Makos. What if another German pilot had seen Stigler escorting the bomber? How would history have recorded the event? How many other secret acts of mercy happened during the war? Their stories lost forever with the men who performed them. And does an act of compassion toward an enemy make you a traitor or the ultimate hero? Number 14. Could the weather have a favorite son? Adolf Hitler survived an astonishing number of assassination attempts during his time in power. Historians estimate there were more than 40 documented plots. Each one failed, often due to what seems like incredible luck or coincidence. But one of the earliest and closest attempts was thwarted not by a guard or a failed bomb, but by something as simple and unpredictable as the weather. The date was November 8, 1939. George Elser was a 36-year-old German carpenter. He was not part of any large conspiracy. He was a lone man who had decided, with chilling clarity, that the Führer needed to be removed to prevent a catastrophic war. He knew that every year on the anniversary of the 1923 Beer Hall Putsch, the German leader gave a speech to his old comrades at the Burgerbräukeller Beer Hall in Munich. For months, Elser meticulously planned his attack. He got a job at a quarry to steal explosives. He secretly hollowed out a stone pillar in the beer hall, right next to the speaker's podium. Over a period of 30 nights, he worked in secret, building a powerful time bomb and hiding it inside the pillar. He designed a timer that was precise and reliable. He set the bomb to go off at 9:20 p.m., right in the middle of the Führer's long, rambling speech. It was a perfect plan. On the night of November 8th, everything was set. The German leader arrived and began his speech as scheduled. But that day, the weather in Munich was bad. Thick fog had settled over the city. This meant that the Führer could not fly back to Berlin as he had planned. He would have to take a train. To catch the earlier train, he had to cut his speech short. He ended his address and left the beer hall at 9:07 p.m. Exactly 13 minutes later, at 9:20 p.m., George Elser's bomb detonated. The explosion was massive. It brought down the ceiling and completely destroyed the area where the podium had been. 8 people were killed, and over 60 were injured. If the speech had run its usual length, the German leader and his entire inner circle would have been wiped out. The course of history would have been profoundly changed. But because of a patch of fog, he walked away completely unharmed. George Elser was arrested later that night trying to cross the border into Switzerland. He was held in a concentration camp for years and was executed in April 1945, just weeks before the end of the war in Europe. His attempt is considered one of the most nearly successful plots to kill the German leader. What if the skies over Munich had been clear that night? How would the world be different if a lone carpenter's bomb had succeeded? Does this event suggest that history is driven by great forces, or that it can turn on something as random and meaningless as the formation of fog? Number 13, what if your mother's face appeared in a stranger's home? Soldiers in combat are a long way from home. They carry with them small mementos, a letter, a lock of hair, a photograph. These small pieces of their past life are precious. They are a connection to a world of peace and family. But what if you found a piece of your past in the most unlikely place imaginable in the home of an enemy soldier? This is the story of Sergeant Alex P. Singer, an American soldier fighting in Germany in 1945. Singer was part of the push into the German heartland. His unit was clearing houses in a small German town. In one house, which had been abandoned by its owners, Singer and his fellow soldiers were looking for hidden enemy troops or booby traps. On a small table, he noticed a family photo album. Idly, he flipped it open. He saw pictures of a German family, a man, a woman, children. People he was supposed to consider his enemy. He kept flipping the pages, and then he stopped. He stared at one of the photographs. It was a formal studio portrait of a woman. Singer's heart pounded in his chest. He knew that face. He knew it better than any face in the world. It was his mother. He was thousands of miles from his home in New Jersey. He was in an enemy's house. And he was looking at a picture of his own mother in their family album. He was completely bewildered. How was this possible? He took the photograph out of the album and showed it to his comrades. They were just as stunned as he was. When he was able to, he sent the photograph home to his mother with a letter asking her to explain this impossible discovery. The answer that came back was just as strange as the discovery itself. His mother explained that many years before the war, before she'd even met his father, she had lived in Germany. As she had a photograph taken at a local studio, the photographer had asked if he could use her portrait as a sample of his work to display in his shop window. She had agreed. Apparently, the German family who owned the album had seen the photograph in the window, liked it, and asked the photographer for a copy. For years, the face of a young Jewish-American woman had been sitting in the photo album of a German family, waiting for her own son to find it during a war. The story, as recounted in numerous collections of wartime oddities, is a stunning example of how interconnected the world is, even in times of division. It is a coincidence that bridges continents, decades, and the brutal divide of war. What were the odds of Sergeant Singer being assigned to that specific unit, that specific town, and searching that specific house? What did the German family think when they looked at the photo of the stranger in their album? And does this story suggest that even when we think we are worlds apart, we are all connected by invisible, improbable threads? Number 12, can a bird be a hero? In the modern age of satellites and digital communication, it is easy to forget how difficult it was to send a message during the Second World War. Radios were unreliable and could be intercepted. Sometimes, the most dependable way to get a critical message through was to use a method that was thousands of years old, the carrier pigeon. One of these pigeons, named G.I. Joe, became one of the most unlikely heroes of the war. In October 1943, the Allied forces were fighting their way up the Italian peninsula. The British 56th London Infantry Division was tasked with capturing the small but heavily fortified town of Colvi Vecchia. The U.S. Army Air Forces were scheduled to provide support. They were planning a massive aerial bombardment of the town to soften up the German defenses before the British troops moved in. The British attack went much better than expected. They managed to capture the town with surprising speed, well ahead of schedule. The German defenders retreated. The British soldiers moved into the town. There was only one problem. The American air raid was still scheduled to happen. The British troops were now occupying the very spot that was about to be carpet-bombed by their own allies. Their radios were not working. They had no way to contact the Americans and call off the attack. The planes were already on their way. It was a disaster in the making. As a last resort, they turned to G.I. Joe. They scribbled a frantic message, stuffed it into the small canister on the pigeon's leg, and released him. The message read, "British troops have captured Colvi Vecchia. Call off airstrike." G.I. Joe flew 20 miles in just 20 minutes. He arrived at the American airbase just as the bombers were taxiing for takeoff. The message was read. The mission was aborted. The pigeon had saved the lives of at least 1,000 British soldiers and the civilians of the town from a catastrophic friendly fire incident. The story of G.I. Joe's flight became legendary. He was awarded the Dickin Medal for animal gallantry, the highest honor an animal can receive in the British military. The citation credited him with the most outstanding flight made by a United States Army homing pigeon in World War II. He was a small bird, but his perfectly timed flight had a massive impact, saving a town and an entire division from annihilation. But what if G.I. Joe had been shot down by a hawk or lost his way in bad weather? How would the friendly fire incident at Colvi Vecchia have affected Allied cooperation in the Italian campaign? And is it not a profound irony that in an age of tanks and bombers, the lives of 1,000 soldiers depended on the instinct and speed of a single bird? Number 11. How do you survive a methamphetamine overdose in the middle of a blizzard? The war was fought not just with bullets and bombs, but with science and chemicals. Both sides experimented with drugs to enhance their soldiers' performance, to keep them awake and fighting for longer. For the German forces, one of these drugs was Pervitin, a tablet form of methamphetamine. It was widely distributed to soldiers, especially pilots and tank crews, to fight off fatigue. But for one Finnish soldier fighting against the Soviets, an overdose of this drug led to one of the most bizarre survival stories of the war. Aimo Koivunen was a Finnish soldier on a ski patrol deep behind enemy lines in March 1944. His unit was ambushed by Soviet forces. In the chaos of the firefight, Koivunen became separated from his patrol. He was exhausted, freezing, and carrying his unit's entire supply of Pervitin. He was struggling to stay awake. In his desperation, he fumbled with the bottle of pills. He was supposed to take one. But with his thick gloves on in the dark, he could not get a single pill out. So he did something reckless. He poured the entire bottle of 30 pills into his hand and swallowed them all. He had just taken 30 times the recommended dose. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. He had a burst of energy, but then he started hallucinating and lost consciousness. When he woke up, he was alone. He had lost his rifle and his food supplies. He was over 60 miles from the finish lines. And he was just beginning a week-long ordeal of survival fueled by a massive drug overdose. For the next 2 weeks, Koivunen skied through the brutal Finnish winter. He survived on pine buds and a single Siberian jay that he caught and ate raw. He was constantly on the move, his heart racing at over 200 beats per minute. He hallucinated visions of friends and enemies. At one point, he was chased by a phantom Soviet ski patrol. He survived a landmine explosion that wounded him and set him on fire. He lay in a ditch for a week, waiting for help, in temperatures that dropped to 20 degrees below zero. When he was finally found and rescued by a Finnish patrol, he had skied over 250 miles. He was taken to a hospital. His heart was still beating at an alarming rate, and he weighed only 94 pounds. But he was alive. Aimo Koivunen had survived starvation, the freezing cold, a landmine, and a methamphetamine overdose that should have killed him. His story is a testament to the extremes of human endurance pushed far beyond its normal limits by a chemical coincidence. What are the long-term physiological effects of surviving such a massive overdose? How much of his survival was due to his own resilience, and how much was due to the drug's effect of keeping his body moving and generating heat? And could his bizarre journey be considered one of the strangest, undocumented medical experiments of the entire war? Number 10. Can a ship named for a poem avenge a nation's loss? Sometimes history has a sense of poetry, a sense of irony. Events align in a way that seems too perfect, too symbolic to be a coincidence. The story of the USS Reuben James and the USS Reuben James is one such case. In October 1941, before the United States had officially entered the war, a German U-boat torpedoed and sank the American destroyer USS Reuben James. The ship was escorting a convoy in the North Atlantic. Over 100 American sailors were killed. It was the first U.S. Navy ship to be sunk by hostile action in the war. The sinking caused outrage in the United States and pushed the country closer to war. The folk singer Woody Guthrie wrote a famous song about the tragedy, memorializing the men who went down in the cold, icy sea. The name Reuben James became a symbol of the unprovoked aggression that would eventually lead to America's entry into the war. In 1943, the U.S. Navy commissioned a new ship. It was a destroyer escort. In honor of the vessel lost in 1941, they gave it the same name, USS Reuben James. This new ship served throughout the war, escorting convoys and hunting for submarines. Now fast forward to the very end of the war in the Pacific. Japan has surrendered. The war is over. The Japanese submarine I-25 was one of the most successful and infamous submarines in the Japanese Navy. It had a unique distinction. It was the only enemy vessel to conduct a bombing raid on the mainland United States during the war, launching a small seaplane that dropped incendiary bombs on the forests of Oregon in 1942. It had also sunk several Allied ships, including, coincidentally, a Soviet submarine. In August 1943, the I-25 was presumed sunk, its fate unknown. But after the war, Japanese records were examined. They revealed the true fate of the I-25. On September 3rd, 1943, off the coast of the New Hebrides Islands, the I-25 was detected and sunk. The American ship that hunted it down and destroyed it with depth charges was the new destroyer escort, the USS Reuben James. Think about the sheer improbability. The first American ship sunk by the Axis powers was the Reuben James. One of the only enemy vessels to attack the American homeland was the submarine I-25, and the ship that ultimately found and destroyed that submarine was the second USS Reuben James, the ship named in honor of the first. It is a perfect, symmetrical piece of historical justice, a coincidence that closes a loop that stretched across two oceans and the entire length of the war. Was the assignment of the Reuben James to that specific patrol a pure coincidence, or did some naval planner with a sense of history have a hand in it? How many other stories of symbolic revenge or poetic justice are hidden in the dry naval records of the war? And does this kind of perfect narrative arc happen by chance? Or is there a human tendency to find patterns and meaning where none exist? Number 9, what if a typhoon was more dangerous than the enemy? In the Pacific Theater, the U.S. Navy fought two enemies. One was the Imperial Japanese Navy, the other was the ocean itself. And in December 1944, a battle with the weather proved to be far more deadly and destructive than any battle with the enemy fleet. Admiral William Bull Halsey was one of the most aggressive and famous commanders of the U.S. Navy. His Third Fleet was a massive force, the most powerful naval armada the world had ever seen. In December 1944, his fleet was operating in the Philippine Sea, supporting the American invasion of the island of Mindoro. The ships were running low on fuel. Halsey ordered them to rendezvous with a group of oil tankers in a specific patch of ocean. But naval meteorologists had detected a developing tropical storm. They warned Halsey that a typhoon was forming and heading toward his planned refueling area. Halsey, under pressure to support the landings and perhaps underestimating the power of the storm, disregarded the initial warnings. He believed the storm would pass to the north. He was wrong. On December 18th, the storm, which would later be named Typhoon Cobra, slammed directly into the Third Fleet. The winds were estimated to be over 140 miles per hour. The waves were mountainous, some as high as 60 feet. The fleet was caught completely by surprise in the middle of a violent, churning sea. The smaller ships, the destroyers and destroyer escorts, were thrown around like toys. The storm was a catastrophe. 3 destroyers, the USS Spence, the USS Monaghan, and the USS Hull, capsized and sank. They were top-heavy, having been loaded with extra equipment and weapons throughout the war, and they were low on fuel, which made them less stable. They simply rolled over and disappeared into the waves. Nearly 800 sailors were lost. Dozens of other ships were heavily damaged. Over 100 aircraft were swept off the decks of the carriers. In a single day, the U.S. Navy lost more men to the weather than it had in many of its major naval battles. The event was a profound shock. A court of inquiry was held, and while it found that Halsey had made an error in judgment, it recommended against any formal punishment. The incident served as a powerful and tragic lesson. It led to the creation of the Navy's Typhoon Tracking Center and dramatically improved weather forecasting for naval operations. The coincidence was the timing of a powerful fleet, at the height of its power, rendered helpless by a random act of nature at a critical moment in a campaign. How much did the pressure to win the war quickly contribute to the decision to ignore the storm warnings? Could modern forecasting technology have prevented the disaster? And what does it say about the nature of power when the largest fleet in history can be brought to its knees not by an enemy, but by a sudden change in the wind? Number 8. What if the man in charge of the enemy's economy was trying to save your people? The German war machine was a massive industrial enterprise. It required immense resources, careful planning, and ruthless efficiency. The man in charge of this machine for much of the war was Albert Speer, the Minister of Armaments and War Production. He was a close confidant of the Führer, but behind the scenes, another man, a man most people have never heard of, was playing an incredibly dangerous double game. His name was Hjalmar Schacht. He was a brilliant economist. He was the president of the German central bank, the Reichsbank, and the Minister of Economics during the 1930s. He is credited with being the financial architect of the German rearmament program. He seemed to be a loyal and essential part of the regime. But Schacht was also deeply troubled by the regime's persecution of the Jewish people. He was not a resistance fighter in the traditional sense. He was a man of finance, so he tried to use the tools he knew best: money and economics. In late 1938, after the violent pogroms of Kristallnacht, Schacht devised an audacious plan. He met secretly with George Rubley, an American diplomat, and Lord Bearsted, a prominent British Jewish leader. Schacht's proposal was this: he would use his power as head of the Reichsbank to allow German Jews to emigrate. Their property and assets in Germany would be seized, as they already were. But these assets would then be used as collateral for an international loan. This loan would be used to fund the resettlement of the Jewish refugees in other countries. In essence, he was trying to create a financial mechanism to ransom the Jewish population of Germany and Austria. It was a cold, calculating plan. It treated people's lives as a financial transaction, but it might have worked. It was known as the Schacht Plan or the Rubley-Schacht Agreement. The plan was a long shot. It was met with skepticism from all sides. Some foreign Jewish organizations were wary of a plan that seemed to legitimize the regime's seizure of property. And more importantly, Schacht was losing his influence within the German government. His more moderate economic views were being pushed aside by the more radical elements of the party, who favored outright confiscation and violence. In January 1939, he was dismissed from his post as head of the Reichsbank. The plan collapsed. The window of opportunity, if it ever truly existed, was closed. Schacht was later implicated in the 1944 plot to kill the Führer and was sent to a concentration camp himself. He survived the war and was tried at the major war crimes tribunals, but he was acquitted. His story is a complex and morally ambiguous one. He was a man who helped build the war economy, but who also tried to use his position to orchestrate a massive, if deeply flawed, rescue operation. The coincidence is that the very man in charge of the economic engine of persecution was simultaneously trying to create a financial escape route for its victims. Was Schacht's plan a genuine humanitarian effort, or was it a cynical attempt to improve Germany's foreign relations and financial standing? If the plan had succeeded, how many hundreds of thousands of lives might have been saved? And can a man who helped build a weapon of war be forgiven if he also tried to create a shield for its intended victims? Number 7. Could a single bullet save a future president? Life is fragile, a matter of inches, a split second, a random piece of shrapnel. In war, thousands of these near misses happen every day. Most are forgotten, but what if the life that was almost lost belonged to a man who would one day become the President of the United States? In August 1943, a young Navy lieutenant named John F. Kennedy was the commander of a small patrol torpedo boat, the PT-109. His boat was operating in the Solomon Islands in a dark, dangerous stretch of water known as the Slot. On the night of August 2nd, his boat was on patrol. It was a moonless night. The crew was trying to intercept Japanese supply ships. Suddenly, out of the blackness, the Japanese destroyer Amagiri appeared. It was moving at high speed. There was no time to react. The destroyer sliced the tiny wooden PT boat in half. 2 of Kennedy's crewmen were killed instantly. The rest were thrown into the water, which was covered in burning fuel. Kennedy, who had been a competitive swimmer at Harvard, gathered the survivors. He towed one badly burned crewman for hours, clutching the man's life jacket strap in his teeth. They eventually made it to a small, uninhabited island. They were stranded deep in enemy territory. For days, Kennedy and his crew fought for survival. Kennedy swam from island to island looking for food and a way to be rescued. Finally, they were discovered by 2 local islanders who were working as scouts for the Allies. Kennedy carved a message onto a coconut shell. It read, Noro ISL, Commander. Native knows posit, he can pilot, 11 alive, need small boat, Kennedy. The islanders took the coconut on a perilous canoe journey to a nearby Allied base. A rescue mission was launched. After nearly a week, Kennedy and his surviving crew were saved. The story of the PT-109 became a central part of Kennedy's political image. It showed him as a cool-headed leader and a war hero. But think about the coincidences. What if the Amagiri had hit the PT-109 a few feet differently, killing everyone on board? What if the 2 island scouts had not been paddling by that particular island on that particular day? What if the coconut message had been lost? A future American presidency and a whole chapter of American history was balanced on a series of improbable chances in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. How did the experience of being so close to death shape Kennedy's later decisions as president, particularly during the Cuban Missile Crisis? Does the random nature of survival in war suggest that leadership is as much a product of luck as it is of skill? And what other future leaders were saved by similar moments of pure dumb chance? Their stories never told. Number 6. Can two brothers find each other in the middle of the biggest battle in history? The D-Day landings on June 6, 1944, were a scene of unimaginable chaos. Over 150,000 men were storming a 50-mile stretch of fortified coastline. They were from different units, different towns, different countries. They were all cogs in a massive machine. The chances of finding a specific person in that maelstrom were practically zero, unless it seems you are the Nyland brothers. The Nyland family of Tonawanda, New York, had sent 4 of their sons to war. There was Sergeant Robert Nyland with the 82nd Airborne Division, Lieutenant Preston Nealand with the 4th Infantry Division, Technical Sergeant Edward Nealand, a bomber pilot in the Pacific, and Sergeant Frederick Fritz Nealand, a paratrooper with the 101st Airborne Division. On D-Day, 3 of the brothers were part of the invasion of Normandy. Fritz Nealand was dropped behind enemy lines with the 101st Airborne. His brother Robert was also a paratrooper, dropped in a different sector with the 82nd. Their brother Preston was scheduled to land on Utah Beach with the 4th Infantry. In the days after the invasion, the fighting was fierce and confusing. Fritz was trying to find his way back to his unit. He heard a rumor that his brother Robert was with a different unit nearby. He went looking for him. He found Robert's regiment, but the news was bad. Robert had been killed in action on D-Day, manning a machine gun post to cover his company's retreat. Grief-stricken, Fritz was told to go see the regimental chaplain, Father Francis Sampson. As he was speaking with the chaplain, Father Sampson told him he had more bad news. He had just received a report that another Nealand brother had also been killed on D-Day. Preston Nealand had been killed on Utah Beach. In the space of a few hours, Fritz had learned that 2 of his brothers were dead. At that point, the War Department in the United States realized the tragedy. They had already lost 2 Nyland brothers. A 3rd brother, Edward, was missing in action in the Pacific, presumed dead after his plane was shot down. Believing that all 3 brothers were gone, the Army decided it had to get the last surviving brother, Fritz, out of combat. It was a direct application of the sole survivor policy. Father Sampson began the paperwork to send Fritz home. And in one of the most incredible coincidences of the war, he was sent to find Fritz, who had rejoined his unit. He drove a jeep through the war-torn French countryside, looking for one specific soldier. He found him. Fritz was brought back, and eventually sent back to the United States to be with his grieving mother. The story gets even stranger. A year later, the family received incredible news. Edward Nealand, the brother who was presumed dead in the Pacific, was alive. He had been a prisoner of war in a Japanese camp in Burma and had been liberated. Of the 4 brothers who went to war, 2 survived. The story of the Nyland brothers became the inspiration for the 1998 film Saving Private Ryan. What were the odds of 2 brothers being killed on the same day in the same invasion, and a 3rd presumed dead on the other side of the world? How many other families suffered similar, unimaginable losses? And does this story show the cold calculus of military policy, or a profound, if tragic, moment of compassion from the machinery of war? Number 5. What if your life depended on the whim of an emperor? In the final, brutal days of the war in the Pacific, hundreds of thousands of Allied prisoners of war were being held in camps across Asia. Their situation was desperate, they were starving, sick, and at the mercy of their captors. As the Allied forces closed in, a chilling order was issued from the Japanese War Ministry. It was known as the Kill-All Order. It instructed camp commandants to execute all prisoners of war if the Allies invaded the Japanese home islands to prevent them from being liberated. One of the men facing this death sentence was a young British officer named Lieutenant Alistair Urquhart, and he had survived the fall of Singapore, 3.5 years of brutal captivity, the construction of the death railway in Thailand, and a voyage on a hell ship that was torpedoed, leaving him adrift in the South China Sea for 5 days. He had then been sent to work in a coal mine in Japan, near the city of Nagasaki. On August 9, 1945, Urquhart was in his prison camp. He heard the sound of a single B-29 bomber flying overhead. He heard the air raid sirens, then he saw a brilliant flash of light. The second atomic bomb had been dropped on Nagasaki, just a few miles from his camp. The blast wave threw him across the room. The camp was destroyed, but Urquhart and many of the prisoners survived. They were now in the middle of a nuclear wasteland. But the bombing had a far more important effect on their fate. The two atomic bombs and the Soviet Union's entry into the war against Japan forced a crisis within the Japanese government. The military leaders wanted to fight to the last man, but Emperor Hirohito, in an unprecedented move, decided to intervene. He made the decision to surrender. On August 15th, the emperor's voice was broadcast on the radio for the first time, announcing Japan's surrender to the nation. This decision, made by one man in a palace in Tokyo, instantly nullified the kill-all order. The lives of hundreds of thousands of prisoners, including Alistair Urquhart, were saved. They were saved not by a battle or a rescue mission, but by a political decision made miles away, prompted by the deployment of a terrifying new weapon. Urquhart's survival was a chain of coincidences. He survived the bomb because he was just far enough away. He survived the execution order because the bomb's use prompted the emperor's decision. His life hung on a thread of nuclear physics and imperial politics. How close did the camp commandants come to carrying out the execution order? What would the world's reaction have been if hundreds of thousands of Allied POWs had been massacred in the final days of the war? And is it the ultimate irony that the most destructive weapon ever created was also, for a specific group of men, a life-saving miracle? Number 4, how can a man be shot, blown up, crash a plane, and still go back to the pub? Some people seem to have a magnetic attraction to trouble, and some people seem to have an almost supernatural ability to survive it. Sir Adrian Carton de Wiart was one of those people. He was a British Army officer whose military career spanned from the Boer War to the Second World War. His life was a string of events, so unbelievable they sound like fiction. He was, by any measure, the unkillable soldier. During the First World War, he was shot in the face, losing his left eye. He was shot through the skull and ankle in one battle. He was shot through the hip in another. He was shot through the leg. He was shot through the ear. He famously pulled off his own fingers when a doctor refused to amputate them. He wore a glass eye, which he would reportedly sometimes tap on the table for emphasis during conversations. He won the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest award for gallantry. You would think that by the time the Second World War started, he would have had enough. But he was just getting started. In 1941, he was flying to Yugoslavia to be a British military liaison. His plane was shot down over the Mediterranean. He was 61 years old. He was one of only 2 survivors. He swam to shore, was captured by the Italians, and spent the next 2 years as a prisoner of war. Even in prison, he was a force of nature. He made 5 escape attempts, at one point tunneling out of his castle prison and evading capture for 8 days, despite being a 61-year-old man with 1 eye, 1 hand, and speaking no Italian. Then, in 1943, the Italians decided to switch sides in the war. In a bizarre twist, they released Carton de Wiart and sent him back to Britain to help negotiate their surrender. His personal journey mirrored the political shift of an entire nation. After that, Prime Minister Winston Churchill sent him to China as his personal representative. The plane he was on, flying over Burma, had an engine failure. It crashed. He survived. He made his way out of the jungle and continued his mission. After the war, he finally retired. He wrote a memoir with the wonderfully understated title, Happy Odyssey. In it, he said, "Frankly, I had enjoyed the war. His life was a coincidence of survival. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time, over and over again. And every single time, against all odds, he walked away. What is the psychological makeup of a man who not only endures, but seems to thrive on such extreme danger? Is there such a thing as being lucky in war, or is it just a combination of resilience, skill, and statistical anomaly? And how did his reputation for being unkillable affect the morale of the men who served with him?" Number 3, could a dictionary save your life? For a soldier in a trench, a pocket Bible or a thick wad of letters from a loved one could be more than just a source of comfort. They could be a lifesaver. There are many stories, some perhaps apocryphal, of a bullet being stopped by an object in a soldier's breast pocket. But one of the most well-documented and bizarre of these stories involves not a Bible, but a book of a very different kind. Private John Jack Muggleton was a British soldier serving with the Leicestershire Regiment. In 1944, he was fighting in the brutal battles in the Netherlands. During one intense firefight near the town of Hertogenbosch, a German sniper's bullet hit him square in the chest. The impact knocked him off his feet. His comrades thought he was dead, but Jack was alive. He was bruised and shaken, but the bullet had not penetrated his body. When he looked at his uniform, he found the reason. The bullet had been stopped by something in his tunic pocket. It was not a Bible, it was a German-English dictionary. Before being sent to the front lines, Jack had been given the small, thick dictionary by his unit. The idea was that it might help him communicate if he encountered German civilians or prisoners. He had tucked it into his pocket and forgotten about it. That small book, full of the language of his enemy, had acted as a makeshift piece of body armor. It was just thick enough, and the paper was just dense enough to stop the sniper's bullet before it could reach his heart. The bullet was found lodged deep within the pages of the dictionary. The book had saved his life. The story was so remarkable that it was reported in his local newspaper back in England. And Jack Muggleton survived the war, returned home, and lived a long life, all thanks to an incredible piece of luck. The very words that defined his enemy had formed a physical shield that protected him from them. But what if the dictionary had been a thinner paperback edition? How many other soldiers were saved by mundane, everyday objects that just happened to be in the right place at the right time? And is there a deeper irony in the fact that a tool for communication and understanding was what stopped a tool of violence and death? Number 2. What if you survived an atomic bomb and then took a train to the city that was about to be hit by the next one? The atomic bomb is a weapon of absolutes. To be at ground zero is to be vaporized. To be near it is to face a firestorm and a wave of radiation. To survive one atomic bombing is a statistical miracle. To survive 2 is to defy the laws of probability and fate itself. There is only one person in history officially recognized by the government of Japan as having survived both. His name was Tsutomu Yamaguchi. On August 6, 1945, Yamaguchi was a 29-year-old naval engineer. He was in Hiroshima on a business trip for his company, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. He was preparing to leave the city. He was walking to the shipyard when he saw a single B-29 bomber in the sky. He saw a small object drop from the plane. Then, the world exploded in a silent, blinding flash of light. He was less than 2 miles from ground zero. The blast ruptured his eardrums, temporarily blinded him, and gave him serious burns on the left side of his body. He was thrown into a potato patch. He managed to crawl to a bomb shelter and spent the night there. The next day, despite his injuries, he made his way through the ruins of the city to the train station. He found a train that was still miraculously running. He got on it and began the overnight journey back to his hometown. His hometown was Nagasaki. He arrived in Nagasaki on August 8th. He went to a hospital to have his burns treated. The next day, August 9th, he went to his office to report to his supervisor about what had happened in Hiroshima. He was describing the incredible white flash, the deafening explosion. His boss was skeptical. He said Yamaguchi must be crazy. How could a single bomb destroy an entire city? At that exact moment, the second atomic bomb detonated over Nagasaki. Again, Yamaguchi was less than 2 miles from ground zero. The office windows shattered. The blast wave tore through the building. But this time, the reinforced concrete structure and the geography of the city sheltered him from the worst of the blast. His existing bandages were blown off, and he was hit by a new wave of radiation, but he survived. Again. He had been in the target zone of 2 nuclear weapons in the space of 3 days and lived to tell the tale. For a second time, he went out into a city that had been wiped from the face of the earth. He went to find his wife and son. He found them in a shelter. They too had survived. Tsutomu Yamaguchi lived a long life. He became a vocal advocate for nuclear disarmament. He passed away in 2010 at the age of 93. His life is a testament to the incredible resilience of the human body and spirit, and a coincidence of such staggering improbability that it almost seems impossible. What were the thoughts that went through his mind as he saw the second flash, realizing the impossible was happening again? How did his body withstand 2 separate massive doses of radiation? And is his story the ultimate proof that an individual's fate is not determined by the grand, destructive forces of history, but by something far stranger and more personal? Number 1, what if the war was a test? We look at these stories and we call them coincidences, a trick of the light, a statistical blip, the inevitable result of millions of people in motion. A few strange stories are bound to emerge. That is the logical explanation. It is the safe explanation. It keeps the universe neat and predictable. But what if it is not the right one? What if these are not just random events? The man who falls from the sky and lives. The twin who takes his brother's place on the gallows. The pilot who spares his enemy. The soldier who finds his mother's picture in a strange land. The man who survives 2 atomic bombs. These stories feel different. They feel like they have a weight, a meaning that goes beyond mere chance. Perhaps the war was a crucible, a test, a time when the normal rules of reality were stretched to their breaking point. In that extreme pressure, maybe the hidden machinery of the universe became visible for a moment. Maybe what we call fate or luck or destiny is a force that is always there, but we only notice it when life and death are on the line. These stories are like cracks in the wall of our understanding. They let a little bit of light through from somewhere else. They force us to ask the uncomfortable questions. Is there a pattern to our lives that we cannot see? Are there threads connecting us that defy geography and circumstance? Is there a reason why one person walks away from a disaster while the person next to them does not? We may never know the answers. These events are, by their nature, unbelievable. They are the exceptions that prove no rule. They are the whispers of a larger story, a story of a war that was not just about nations and armies, but about the strange and unpredictable fate of every single person caught within it. So, the final question is not about history. It is about us. After hearing these stories, what do you believe? Do we live in a world of random chaos, or are we all part of a story that has already been written? Is it all just a coincidence? Or is coincidence just another word for a miracle we do not understand?